She slapped me so hard my head snapped to the side and the entire ballroom went silent for half a second before the laughter started. 300 guests, crystal chandeliers overhead, champagne glasses mid-air, all watching as my sister looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're nothing but garbage." I tasted blood on my lip and didn't move, not when someone in the front row whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Why is she even here?" I stood there in a $49 dress I bought on clearance, surrounded by people who had known me my whole life, and not a single one of them said a word in my defense. And then, just as the laughter swelled, her fiancé stepped forward, his voice cutting through the room like glass. "Do you even know who she is?" If this story speaks to your heart, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if it truly resonates with you, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now, because I want to know who's here with me in this moment. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 29 years old, and that was the night my entire family tried to erase me in front of 300 people only to have everything they believed about me shattered in seconds. But to understand how I ended up standing in that ballroom, humiliated and alone, you have to go back to where it all started, long before the wedding, long before the lie that changed everything. Growing up in our house in Fairfield, Connecticut, there were always two versions of reality, the one my parents showed the world and the one I lived every single day. My sister Madison was the golden child, the one with the perfect smile, the one who could do no wrong, the one my parents introduced with pride at every dinner party, while I learned early on how to make myself smaller, quieter, easier to ignore. When I was 10, I won first place at the regional science fair, beating out 42 other students, and I remember running into the kitchen holding that blue ribbon so tight my fingers hurt, waiting for someone, anyone, to look at me the way they looked at her. My mom hugged me for exactly 3 seconds before Madison walked in crying about a bad dance rehearsal, and just like that, the moment disappeared, swallowed whole. That was the pattern. It was always the pattern. Madison needed more. Madison mattered more. Madison was the future, and I was just there, existing in the background like furniture no one noticed until it was in the way. By the time I turned 16, I had stopped expecting anything different. I stopped bringing home awards, stopped talking about my grades, stopped asking for things I already knew the answer to. But what I didn't understand back then was that it wasn't just neglect, it was preparation. Because everything my family did, every time they overlooked me, every time they chose her, every time they rewrote the story to make me smaller and her bigger, it was building towards something I never saw coming, and neither did he. Because the man standing at the front of that ballroom, the man who had just interrupted my humiliation, wasn't just my sister's fiancé. He was the one person in that entire room who knew the truth about me. And the truth was about to tear everything apart. The truth is, I learned very early that love in our house was not something you were given, it was something you had to earn, and no matter how hard I tried, I was always falling just short. Madison never had to try. She walked into rooms and people noticed. I worked twice as hard and still felt invisible. When I was 12, my parents spent $8,000 on her competitive dance season, costumes, travel, private coaching, while I sat at the kitchen table using a calculator with a missing battery cover, teaching myself algebra from a used textbook I found at a yard sale. They called it being practical. They said she had talent worth investing in. They said I was independent. That word followed me everywhere. Independent meant I did not need help. Independent meant I should not expect support. Independent meant I could be ignored without guilt. By high school, the gap between us was no longer subtle. It was structural. Madison got a brand new car on her 16th birthday, a white BMW with a bow on top parked in the driveway. I got a quiet congratulations when I passed my advanced placement exams with top scores. No party, no celebration, just a nod from my father while he checked his phone. I told myself it did not matter. I told myself I did not need their approval. But that was not entirely true. There was one moment, just one, when everything almost changed. I was 18 when I got accepted into Columbia University with a partial scholarship. I remember the letter shaking in my hands, the way my heart felt like it might burst out of my chest. For the first time in my life, my father looked at me and did not look past me. He read the acceptance letter twice, slowly, like he was trying to understand how this could be real. My mother called relatives that night. Emily got into Columbia, she said, and there was something unfamiliar in her voice. Pride. Real pride. For a few days, I allowed myself to believe things might finally be different, that maybe I had done enough, that maybe I mattered. Madison smiled through all of it, supportive, encouraging, asking questions about dorms and classes and professors. I thought she was happy for me. I thought we had crossed some invisible line where we could finally exist as equals. I was wrong. 3 weeks later, my father called me into his office, closed the door, and sat down across from me with that same expression he used when discussing finances. Practical, calculated. He said Columbia was too expensive. Even with the scholarship, he said it did not make sense to invest that kind of money in a degree that would not guarantee a strong return. Then he told me Madison needed help launching her boutique business. He said the family had decided to support her instead. I remember staring at him, waiting for the rest of the sentence, waiting for the part where he said they would find a way to support both of us. It never came. My mother stood in the doorway, arms crossed, avoiding my eyes. Madison was behind her, silent. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just quietly, like a door closing. I nodded. I said I understood. And that was the last time I asked them for anything. I turned down Columbia. I enrolled in a state school instead, worked 3 jobs, and built my life piece by piece without them. Coffee shop shifts at 5 in the morning, bookkeeping at night. Weekends spent tutoring just to cover rent that was $600 a month for a room barely bigger than a closet. I stopped going home for holidays. At first, they noticed. Then they stopped. Years passed like that. Distance became normal. Silence became expected. And then, out of nowhere, Madison called me. Her voice was warm, almost nostalgic. She said she was getting married. She said she wanted me there. Not just there, she said, but part of it. She said it was time to put the past behind us. I should have known better. But some part of me, the part that still remembered that brief moment when my father looked proud, the part that still hoped for something different, said yes. I bought that $49 dress. I took 2 days off work I could not afford to miss. I showed up, and I walked straight into the same pattern I had spent my entire life trying to escape, except this time it was bigger, louder, and about to break in a way none of them saw coming. The first thing I noticed when I arrived at the wedding venue was how perfect everything looked, the kind of perfection that feels expensive, calculated, almost staged for approval. The ballroom overlooked the water, floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting a sunset that looked like it had been ordered in advance, tables dressed in white linen, gold accents catching the light from chandeliers that probably cost more than my yearly rent. I stood there for a second, just inside the entrance, holding my invitation like I needed proof that I was allowed to be there. No one greeted me. No one came over. A few relatives glanced in my direction, then quickly looked away, like acknowledging me would make things uncomfortable. That was familiar. I found my name on the seating chart after a few minutes, tucked near the back corner, table 27, right next to the service station where waiters stacked plates and whispered orders, not even with family. Not even with distant cousins. Just a placeholder. A technical inclusion. I told myself it did not matter. I had expected this. What I had not expected was him. Daniel Hayes. I had only heard his name a few times before the wedding, always in passing, always framed through Madison's version of reality. Successful. Connected. A man who came from money and understood how the world worked. The kind of man my parents respected immediately. The kind of man they would never have chosen for me. I saw him across the room near the bar, speaking to a group of guests, calm, composed, the kind of presence that draws attention without trying. For a second, his eyes met mine. Just a second. But there was recognition there, not confusion, not polite acknowledgement. Recognition. I looked away first. That was the first crack in the story I had been told. The ceremony itself was flawless. Madison walked down the aisle like she had been rehearsing this moment her entire life, every step measured, every expression controlled, the perfect bride in a perfect world. People cried, people smiled. My parents sat in the front row, glowing with pride, the kind of pride I had spent years trying to earn and never received. I watched from the back, hands folded in my lap, quiet, invisible, exactly where I had always been placed. But there were moments, small ones, that did not fit. Daniel glanced at me more than once, not long enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for me to feel it, like he was checking something, confirming something, holding on to a detail no one else could see. It made no sense. Not yet. The reception started. Music filled the room. Glasses clinked. Laughter spread across the tables like it belonged there. I stayed where I was, answering small talk with polite nods, counting minutes instead of conversations. Then Madison's voice cut through the room. She called my name. Loud. Too loud. Conversation slowed. Heads turned. I felt it immediately. That shift in energy, like the room had decided something was about to happen. She stood near the center of the floor, microphone in hand, smiling in a way that did not reach her eyes. "Emily, come here," she said, sweet but sharp underneath. For a second, I considered not moving. But 30 pairs of eyes were already on me. Then 50. Then more. I stood up and walked toward her, each step measured, controlled, like I had practiced this my entire life. When I reached her, she looked at me the way she used to when we were kids, right before she turned everything against me. There it was. The pattern, the setup. She laughed softly into the microphone and said, "I just wanted to thank my sister for showing up tonight because honestly, I did not expect her to." A few people chuckled. My parents did not move. Madison tilted her head slightly, studying me like I was something she had already decided the value of. Then she leaned closer, her voice dropping just enough that the microphone barely caught it, but everyone still heard. "Tell them, Emily. Tell them why you really came." The room went still, completely still, and that was the moment I understood this was never about reconciliation. It was about control. It was about rewriting the story one more time, in front of an audience big enough to make it permanent. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Not because I did not have anything to say, but because I suddenly realized something far more important. This was not the moment I had been waiting for. This was the moment she had set up. And somewhere in that room, Daniel Hayes was watching, waiting, holding a truth that was about to change everything. For a moment, no one moved. The music had stopped, the servers had frozen mid-step, even the sound of silverware had disappeared like the entire room was holding its breath. Madison smiled wider, feeding off the silence, feeding off the attention. "Tell them," she repeated, her voice sharper now, louder, making sure every guest could hear. "Tell them how you always show up when there is something to take." A ripple of murmurs spread through the tables. I saw it in their faces, the shift from curiosity to judgment, the way people lean into a story when they think they already know the ending. My father looked down at his glass, not at me. My mother adjusted her napkin, avoiding eye contact like she always did, when the truth was inconvenient. That was the confirmation. They knew what she was about to say, or worse, they believed it. Madison took a small step closer, lifting her chin like she was about to deliver something important. She said I had a habit of attaching myself to successful people, that I only reached out when I needed money, that I had shown up uninvited because I thought I could benefit from her wedding, from her connections, from her life. Each sentence was calm, controlled, almost rehearsed. It sounded believable because it had been designed to sound believable. I did not interrupt. I did not defend myself. Not because I could not, but because I recognized the structure. This was not a conversation. This was a performance, and she had been practicing it for years. A few guests nodded. Someone laughed softly, not cruel, just comfortable enough to accept what they were hearing. That was the worst part. Not the accusation, the acceptance. Madison turned slightly, addressing the room now instead of me. "I tried to include her," she said, her voice softening in a way that felt almost convincing. "But you cannot keep someone in your life when all they do is take." She looked back at me then, waiting, expecting me to react, to break, to give her something she could use to complete the picture she was painting. Instead, I stayed still. I had learned that stillness was its own kind of power. Her smile flickered, just for a second. Then it hardened. And that was when she did it. Not loud, not dramatic, just a sharp, controlled movement meant to punctuate her story. A statement more than anything else. A final piece of evidence for the audience she had carefully built. The room reacted instantly. A few gasps, more laughter, a wave of energy that rolled outward from the center like a signal had been sent. I tasted something metallic again and kept my eyes on her, not on the crowd, not on my parents, just on her. Because in that moment, I saw something I had never seen before. Not confidence, not control, Fear. Just a flicker. But it was there. And it told me everything I needed to know. She needed this moment to work. She needed the room to believe her, because if they did not, everything she had built on top of that story would collapse. I heard a chair move somewhere behind me. Slow. Deliberate. Not rushed, not reactive, but intentional. The kind of movement that shifts attention without asking for it. Then his voice, calm but unmistakable, cut through the noise. Enough. It was not loud, but it carried. Conversations stopped mid-word. Madison's expression froze for half a second before she turned toward him, still holding the microphone like she could control what happened next. Daniel stepped forward into the center of the room, not looking at her at first, but at me. That same recognition from earlier, steady, certain. Then he turned to the guests. "You are all reacting to a story," he said, his tone even, measured, "but you have not asked a single question about whether it is true." A few people shifted in their seats. Someone cleared their throat. The energy in the room changed again, not gone, just redirected. Madison laughed lightly, trying to pull it back. "Daniel, this is not the time." But he did not look at her. Not yet. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small, rectangular, a card, simple, white. He held it between his fingers like it weighed more than it should. "I think it is time they knew who Emily really is," he said. And for the first time that night, my parents looked at me, really looked at me, not past me, not through me, but at me, like they were seeing something they had never bothered to see before. The room went quiet again. Not the same silence as before. This one felt different. This one felt like the moment before something breaks. No one spoke, not immediately. The card in Daniel's hand looked ordinary, the kind of thing you would hand someone without thinking twice. But the way he held it, steady, deliberate, made it feel like the center of gravity in that entire room. Madison let out a small laugh, the kind people use when they think they can still control the narrative. "Daniel," she said, lowering the microphone slightly, "you are overreacting. This is not necessary." But her voice was thinner now, stretched just enough to reveal what sat underneath it. Daniel did not respond to her. He stepped closer to the nearest table and handed the card to a man in a navy suit, someone I recognized as one of Madison's investors. The man took it, glanced down, and for a second, nothing happened. Then his posture changed. Subtle, but undeniable. He looked up, not at Madison, but at me, then back at the card. Then at Daniel. "What is this?" he asked quietly. Daniel did not raise his voice. "It is her company," he said. The words landed heavier than anything Madison had said all night. A ripple moved through the guests again, but this time it was not laughter. It was confusion, questions, the beginning of doubt. Madison shook her head immediately, stepping forward, trying to close the distance, trying to reclaim control. "That is not funny," she said quickly. "Do not do this here." But Daniel finally looked at her then, and there was nothing uncertain in his expression. "I am not joking," he said. And then he said my name, not the way my family said it. Not dismissive, not reduced, but clear, direct, like it carried weight. "Emily Carter is the founder of Carter Analytics." A few people exchanged glances. The name meant something. Not to everyone, but to enough of them. I saw it register in real time. Phones came out, screens lit up. Someone at the back whispered, "Wait, that company just closed a deal in San Francisco last quarter." Another voice. "I read about them in Forbes." Madison's smile disappeared completely. For a second, she looked at me, really looked at me, like she was trying to recalculate something she had already decided. "That is not possible," she said. But it came out too fast, too defensive. My father stood up slowly from his chair, his eyes fixed on Daniel, not on me, like he was trying to understand how this information had entered his world without his permission. Daniel reached into his pocket again, and this time pulled out his phone, unlocked it, and turned the screen toward the guests nearest him. Articles, numbers, names, all of it connected, all of it real. I had not said a word yet. I had not needed to. Because the truth does not need volume when it has evidence. Madison took a step back, her hand tightening around the microphone. "This is some kind of misunderstanding," she said, but the room was no longer listening to her the same way. That shift had already happened. The story she had built was cracking, and she could feel it. Daniel took one more step forward, closing the space between us, but still not touching me, still keeping that distance that respected something no one else in that room had ever considered. "You told everyone she came here to take something," he said, his voice calm, steady, but now unmistakably firm. Then he looked around the room, making sure they were all watching. "The truth is, she built something all of you have already invested in." Silence, not empty this time, heavy. My mother's hand dropped to her side. My father's face had gone completely still, the kind of stillness that comes right before realization hits. And then Daniel said the one thing that broke whatever was left of the version of me they had created. "You did not invite her here," he said, his eyes returning to Madison. "You built your future on something she created, and you never even knew it." That was the moment everything turned. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a shift in understanding that moved through the room like a quiet storm. And for the first time in my life, I was not invisible anymore. The ballroom never fully recovered after that moment. Conversations did not restart the way they were supposed to. The music came back on, but softer, almost uncertain, like even the speakers understood something had shifted. People looked at me differently now, not with pity, not with dismissal, but with a kind of quiet recognition that felt unfamiliar and honestly a little overwhelming. I did not stay long after that. I did not need to. I walked out of that room the same way I had walked into it, alone. But for the first time in my life, it did not feel like loneliness. It felt like space, real space, the kind you can finally breathe in. In the weeks that followed, things changed. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in ways that mattered. My parents called, more than once. The first time, I let it ring. The second time, I answered. Not because everything was fixed, but because I had learned something important. Closure does not come from them suddenly understanding your worth. It comes from you no longer needing them to. Madison sent a message too. Short, careful, nothing like the version of her that stood in that ballroom. I did not respond right away. And when I finally did, it was not with anger. It was with boundaries. Clear, simple, necessary. Carter Analytics kept growing. The work I built quietly, without applause, without support, without anyone believing in it at the beginning, became something real, something stable, something entirely mine. And that, more than anything, was the difference. I was no longer trying to prove anything to anyone. I was living a life I chose, not one I was trying to earn. If you are listening to this, and you have ever felt like the invisible one, the one who gets overlooked, the one who is only seen when it is convenient for someone else, I need you to hear this. Your value does not decrease just because someone refuses to see it. And you do not have to stay in places where you are constantly asked to shrink just to make others comfortable. Walking away is not failure. Sometimes, it is the most honest form of self-respect you have. Thank you for staying with me through this story, for listening, for being here in a moment that once felt impossibly isolating. It means more than I can explain. And I would love to know, have you ever had a moment where you realized you no longer needed someone's approval to feel whole? If this story truly resonated with you, you can like and subscribe, but only if it feels right to you. My name is Emily Carter. I am 29 years old, and the lesson I want to leave you with is this: you do not have to be recognized to be worthy.